Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. We have an exciting topic today, which is managing SAP transports directly from ServiceNow, Jira, or Azure DevOps. Just a few notes for today's session. If you have any questions as we go through the presentation today, please put your questions in the chat, and we'll be happy to take some time to answer those as we get towards the end of our presentation. We will be sending out a recording to anybody who has registered for the webinar, so please don't hesitate to review that and reach out to us if you have further questions after today's call. I'm excited to introduce my guest for today. It is Valdrin Spihia. He is a Core ALM architect for application lifecycle management with SAP, and he's going to be walking us through our demonstration today. Before we get there, I'm just going to give you a bit of an overview on who we are for those who have not interacted with Core ALM yet. And for that, I am going to share my screen quickly here. Core ALM's been in business for about 15 years now, and we started as a company when our CEO and founder left his position at SAP. Most of our team actually previously worked at SAP before the start of Core ALM. And so Labanat left his position where he was the head of the application lifecycle management team at SAP. At the time, it was just SAP Solution Manager. And when he left, the reason why he left is he saw an opportunity. There weren't really very many service providing firms that were out there that were just serving SAP customers for application lifecycle management tools and services, and saw an opportunity to go into that space and focus on that exclusive niche market. And because of the connections and the people that he knew from SAP, started out of the gate and were very successful serving customers early on. It was about 2018 when he saw an opportunity to start doing software development, because many customers were having the same kinds of challenges, same problems that we were trying to solve. And they were using other tools for their non-SAP applications to manage life cycles beyond just Solution Manager, like Jira, Azure DevOps, ServiceNow, those types of applications, and really saw an opportunity to kind of get the best of both worlds, bring those tools together with Solution Manager. Since then, we've actually been expanding our footprint, and we've been adding Cloud ALM integrations, as well as direct connections, which is what we're going to be talking about today, between those applications and SAP Transport Management Services directly, so STMS, as it is called, which basically gives you a really seamless experience of being able to manage transports directly from those applications without the need for another application in between. So that is our topic for today. We'll talk a little bit about the benefits of that. What you can get is you can achieve simplified administration. Basically, you can take your existing process, you can automate it, make it more efficient, and you really just need the application that you have in place today. So if you're using ServiceNow or Jira or Azure DevOps, and you want to have that seamlessly integrate across all of your applications, SAP, non-SAP, with all of the status information going back and forth, because you still need to use SAP to do those transport management, but to be able to seamlessly flow all of that information back and forth depending on that. And then if you want to get into automations like DevOps or those types of things, automated testing, you can build processes that take all that and put it all together into a cohesive end-to-end process. You can also minimize the impact to your existing change process. So by using the same tools across the landscape, you get the benefit of not having to pivot between applications, and making sure you have consistency and everybody knows and follows the process consistently. And then you can enhance your security and compliance controls. This is like things like segregation of duties, making sure that you have the right checks and balances in play before you release transports into production, and having centralized compliance reporting. Those are some of the benefits that our customers talk about. And we've served some of SAP's largest companies, largest customers. Many of these people have been running our services for a long period of time and are getting great use out of our tools, and at times we do customized services for them as well. Outside of just the features that we're going to be talking about in today's product, We provide services across the entire lifecycle management for SAP and in those applications. That includes planning, whether you're doing requirements management, process management, design, whether you're doing build, sprint planning, test execution, test optimization, test automation, and even manual testing. We can support you with those with tools as well as services. We can handle the release management, which is where we're going to be focused on for today's conversation, and also monitoring as well. So those are some features. Not sure where I'm getting this password pop up here, but don't worry about that. So those are some of the features that we do cover, and there's lots of other applications where we do provide services and support, as well as guidance on how to use these tools together. Signavio, Tricentis, whether it's Tosca or Live Compare, and those are some of the leading tools. The reason why we brought this tool that we're going to be talking about today out there, many people that run SAP have these other tools in place, but they don't have them integrated, and so it leads to kind of decentralized access, inconsistencies in data, and at very least duplication of effort, because there's no automation and no way of actually having those applications talk to each other. It's a very complex thing. We've built it now for several different applications, and having bi-directional integration is challenging. And so it's real-time bi-directional integration that we've built, and it's very configurable. So no matter how you've customized your process, we can have the applications talk to each other seamlessly. So that's what we've built with these connectors. And we have it for Solution Manager, we have it for Cloud ALM, and we have the direct transport management controls. So this is a quick look at our products on the roadmap, what we have in terms of the coverage for implementations, operations, for Solution Manager, Cloud ALM, and Direct TMS. Just a quick note, we are going to be at the SAP ALM Summit in Newtown Square, SAP Newtown Square next week. So if you happen to be there, we would love to meet up with you and chat and see if we can answer any additional questions that you might have. And we will be doing a live presentation. So if you're interested, please do get in touch with us, and we can arrange to meet. That's all I have in terms of presentations from a slide perspective. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn over the presentation to Baldwin, and I'm going to ask for him to share his screen, and then he can walk us through a live demonstration of the applications. Welcome, Baldwin.
Thank you very much, Steve. Can you confirm you can see my screen okay?
Yeah, I can hear you and I can see your screen. That's great.
Okay, great. Hi, everyone. My name is Valdrin Spaia. As Steve mentioned, one of the SAP ALM architects with Core ALM. And in today's session, I will be walking you through a presentation through the tool chain on SAP transport management and integration with the 3 different tools, which in our case, we're going to showcase today the integration with Azure DevOps, with Jira integration, and also with ServiceNow. And as Steve mentioned, this integration is a direct integration with transport management or TMS. In this case, for example, if you have any tools such as Charm, or if you have Charm and our other third-party tools that are integrated with, let's say, Azure DevOps, Jira, or ServiceNow, in this integration, what you will see is that these 3 different tools in here are integrated directly with TMS without having the need to have any type of middleware, such as Charm or any third-party tools that are non-SAP. And the value of this integration is that you're able to utilize your current workflow and also be able to create, release, import, and also some additional features directly from one of these tools into the TMS. So if you have a current workflow, for example, let's say in ServiceNow, where you manage all of your changes, you have your approvals and etc. to promote from one environment to another. Therefore, this tool will give you the value of being able to integrate directly within that, within your change process, and be able to manage your changes from the ServiceNow tool without any middleware. Now, in addition to that, besides just creating transports and being able to manage those changes, we also offer different features, for example, that are similar to other change management tools for TMS. So an example is you can decouple and couple transport. So for example, if anyone creates a transport outside of the change management tool, you're also able to create a change within, let's say, one of the tools like ServiceNow, Jira, or Azure DevOps, and be able to couple or decouple that transport within your change process. In addition to that, we also have transport of copies. So therefore, you can go back and forth between your dev and QA. Therefore, you don't have to release a transport. This will automatically create a transport of copies for you, import into the target environment, and then you can go back and forth until you're ready to pass a test. In addition to that, we also have cross-system object lock-in and downgrade protection. So, for example, for any version management of those changes, especially if you are in a project mode where you have multiple transports, you're able to have cross-system object lock between different environments and also have a downgrade protection to manage versioning. Also, especially this is very important when you have larger enhancements, for example, or let's say minor or bigger projects. We have a mass transport deployment, where at any given time, when you have multiple transports that you need to promote into a productive environment together, you can utilize the mass transport deployment where you deploy multiple transports at once. Or, for example, we see customers where they have cab approvals on like a end of the week, and then they import transports from multiple teams together. That's also a pretty good feature where you don't have to import these changes manually one by one. In addition to that, we also have retrofit, for example, to manage your N and N+1, especially if you have any type of projects where you need to keep the landscapes consistent. You're able to retrofit from one environment to another. And then also a repack, what you'll see there, the star, that's also another feature that's upcoming within this integration as well, where you're able to repack changes and push them from one environment to another. Now, in the next couple of slides here, I'll go through what the layout and how the integration actually works. So the first one is going to be around ServiceNow. Within ServiceNow, we don't necessarily make many changes to your current layout. So for example, if you already have a manual SAP process that you follow within your ServiceNow, if you are to deploy our application, what we would have is a couple of different options for you. One of them would be that you could either integrate this directly within your current change process form, like in your normal, urgent, or standard, even customized change requests that you have, or you could also integrate within the tasks or C tasks that are called within ServiceNow, and I'll show that option as well. But from our perspective, the only additional change that you will have in ServiceNow, you'll have an additional tab, like for example, the one that you see in here, SAP Transport. And then within this option in here, then you'll get all of these different buttons that you can create a transport, create tasks, import transports, and etc. So pretty much you get all of these different actions that you can perform directly within your change management tool. In addition to that, for example, you can also have these actions or buttons, restrictive or optional. So if you see in my first screenshot in here, you'll have some options that are, for example, maybe restrictive to a certain status within the change task. So an example, if it's, for example, the change task is still in, let's say, in a SAS or is still in new status, you can limit them that where you're not allowed to import a change into your QA or promote it into production without that change being approved. And then, for example, if you can also have the option where all of the action buttons show at the same time, for example, then you can perform without having any restrictions based on the status of your change. So this means if there's no restrictions, you're able to create and import a change into different environments without being dependent on the ServiceNow workflow or status. Now, in addition to that, within ServiceNow, you can also have an option where, for example, you can manage your transport management via C-tasks. So this option, for example, this is just let's say a sample workflow that I'm showing here. An example is at any given time when you are in a set value, it will automatically create a change task similar to, for example, if you're using change tasks already. And then within this change tasks, then you can create additional workflows, for example, where when you are in development, you can create a transport, create a task, create a TR, decouple a transport, and etc. And then in addition to that, you can also, as you go through this workflow in the change task, you can also create and import transport of copies, and then you can also release and import those changes into TR. Now let's take an example. Once your changes are imported into your QA environment, at that point, the idea is that you've tested these changes and you're going to go for a cap approval, or let's say approve that change during your promotion to production. And then once that change is approved, at that point, our integration will trigger another change task. Then this would be, for example, at the implement stage. At that point, during this change task, for example, you would also import that change, you would authorize it, and you would import it into a productive environment. So this is the second option that you have with ServiceNow if you don't want to integrate directly within your change workflow. In this case, you would manage all of your transport via change tasks, and then once they are imported into production, you're able to close that change and also close all of the change tasks that are underneath as well. And now within the Jira side, and just keep in mind one item that I did not touch base on, with each one of these applications, this is an out of the box where you will have a mapping page, for example, similar to this, where you're able to determine, especially if you decide to do restrictive workflows, where, for example, what type of options do you get within a certain status that you are, and this is an example for Jira, ServiceNow, and Azure DevOps. So an example is if you are, let's say, if you have a standard Jira workflow where you are, let's say, in progress or in test, and at that point, maybe when you are in progress, you just want to be able to create a TR. You would just want to have an option to say create TR, or for example, couple a transport, but not necessarily be able to import those changes into your QA environment or release a transport. So on this mapping page, you'll be able to determine all of the actions that you want to take. You pretty much can design your change process directly within this mapping page, very similar to how we do process flows. However, within the Jira side, you'll also have an option in here towards the bottom within your activity, for example, where you'll have a SAP transport tab. And then within that SAP transport tab, especially if it's a restricted workflow, you'll have some additional action buttons in here where you can select and depend on what you need to do for the transport management. Now, in this case, as soon as you click on your transport tab, you'll also have a create TR option, and at the bottom you'll have a very simple table where it will give you, for example, what is your target environment, what transport did you create, who's it assigned to, and etc. and etc. And then also towards the right-hand side, if you decide to turn on your let's say your CSOL and downgrade protection and those additional advanced features, in that case, then you'll also have some checks in here. So for example, if you have a downgrade protection failure, you're trying to import something, let's say into your productive or your QA environment, and you're going to downgrade a version of a program that it's in a higher version. In this case, Willis will automatically give you a warning, and you'll have to redo the import or to retry the import because you're going to downgrade a version. So all of those checks, I would say, are already embedded within this workflow, and you don't necessarily have to do any additional steps to perform. Now within this next screen in here, this is the Azure DevOps layout. So very similar to so all of our integrations between these three different tools are very similar. The only differences in here is that you're going to see some maybe the action buttons and etc. might be different given the fact that these are owned by other companies. So within the Azure DevOps, you'll also have, for example, a mapping page where you can do your status mapping between your status and what actions should be possible within those statuses of Azure DevOps. And then towards the bottom in here, very similar to the Jira workflow, you'll have all of the different actions in here for you to perform to create and import the transport to QA and all the way to a productive environment. So and again, from a options perspective, for ADO as well, you have a restrictive and also a optional ADO status-based workflow, just depending how your projects and how your change process is today. Okay, so now from additional features perspective, these are more technical in nature. So we support transport groups. So for example, if you have set up transport groups within your TMS, our integration will support those. So pretty much you can add any new task in an existing transport. So at any given time when you have a transport and you want to add an additional task, for example, especially if you want to assign something to another user, you can create those tasks directly from one of these tools within the TMS integration. You can, at any given time, for example, if let's say you triggered a status release or a status or a transport import within the integration, you have a refresh option where you can refresh and know exactly what is the status of the transport. So for example, even if it fails, you'll get an option, you'll get a status update within the transport area that a transport has failed, for example, or has been imported within the next environment. We also have a checklist. So for example, if you have any type of special handling for your transports, such as if you need to perform different actions before or after the transport, you'll have a checklist where you can decide if you want to enable it and to perform a pre or a post checklist for each one of the transports or changes that you are maintaining. Re-import options for transport requests. So for example, if let's say if a transport fails, you do have a re-import option where you can re-import that transport at any given time. Let's say if you made some additional changes in your QA environment, you can trigger it directly from the integration rather than doing it from TMS. And then also we have an authorization check in SAP. So, just because, for example, you can see the transport tab, it doesn't mean that you're able to create a transport and etc. So any transports that you create in Jira and etc., you do have to set up some authorizations on the SAP side. You do have to have access on the SAP side to create transports, let's say in SE09 and etc., or for example to import transports into the next environment. So that same user has to exist in, let's say in this case, in Jira and also in SAP in order for you to be able to create, import, and etc. a transport directly from this tool. Also, many of our customers do not just have one Jira project or one Azure project. Usually that's not the case with ServiceNow, but with these two tools, you can have multiple, you can have the same project tied to multiple SAP landscape, for example. Also, you can have multiple projects, multiple Jira projects mapped to one landscape as well. Okay. Also, for example, the last but not least, it's you can fetch the user list directly from SAP into one of these third-party tools. So for example, if you want to create a transport for a specific user, you should be able to see that user directly in Jira, Azure, or ServiceNow. So you should be able to see that user list. And then, as I mentioned in my earlier slides, mass import of transports. This is where, especially when you have multiple transports, you're able to use this option to import multiple changes at the same time. And just keep in mind, we also manage the versioning of transport, or the, for example, the release, a timestamp, and at the order of transport that they should be imported. So there's some logic behind the mass import of transports where it will determine which transport should be imported first and second, and etc. Okay, in the next part of the session, so we're going to go through a demonstration. So let me go ahead and share a different screen in here. So we're going to go through a couple of different applications. One of the first one that we're going to go through is going to be ServiceNow. So we're going to go through the process of us creating a transport and etc. directly from a change task. So one of the first steps that we'll do in here is we'll go ahead and create, let's say in this case, we'll go ahead and create a normal change in here. And then what I'll do is I'll assign this to myself. And then what you'll notice in here is within the ServiceNow application, we'll add is an additional field in here called SAP change. And then within this SAP change process, as soon as, for example, we select yes, you'll see the second option that will pop up here towards the bottom, for example. So this is one option. So if you wanted to have this form directly within the ServiceNow form. Now, the second option is within here, for example, now you can do whatever you'd like with this transport, like create a transport and etc., without having any restrictions whatsoever. The second option that we're going to go through today is how do you, for example, if you wanted to utilize using C tasks within ServiceNow. So let's say create a. And then what I am going to do is I'm going to go ahead and save this change very quickly. And then what you will see in here is, for example, that as soon as I save that change, it will automatically create a C task in here. And again, this is out of the box. So it's not necessarily that you have to do something extra to create the C task. And then within the C task, I'll show you a specific workflow that we have. So what I have in here is I have some restrictive workflows, for example. So I'm not even able to see the SAP transport or the options at all of what I can do. So, but once I set this in development, for example, then you'll see that I'll have different options for me to be able to create a transport. So let me go ahead and assign this to a colleague of mine, and then we'll just copy and paste this. And then the next option is that I'm going to go ahead and save this. And then we're going to go ahead and create a TR. So once you click on create a TR, then you'll have these different types of options. The initial one is going to be that I want to enter a short description. So my environment is called ECD. So I'm going to go ahead and search. Also, as well, for it, when you're creating a transport, we will be able to bring all of your environments within this screen. So therefore, for example, the user does not necessarily have to enter an environment. You can select it directly from here, and then you can decide if you want to create a customizing or a workbench, for example. In my case, I'm going to go ahead for a customizing. And then in here, what I'm also going to do is I am going to go ahead and search. So again, we bring all of our users in here. So I'm going to go ahead and select my users. As you see, if I search for a certain user, in this case, it should automatically bring that user and select it. And then I'm going to add that user to create a task. So I'm creating a customizing transport as an owner. I'm also adding a task. And then you can add here multiple users as you want. Also, if you have any TR checks, for example, manual steps that you need to execute, you can check those boxes. In our case, we'll just go through and create the transport in here. So once you select on create, it's fairly quick and it will automatically create the transport for you. So for example, we created this specific transport and also created the task for the transport. And then it has some different options in here, and it'll pretty much show you the status and etc. Now, because we didn't import anything, no, etc., there's not going to be any logs captured in here yet. So the next step that I'm going to do is I do have to go very similar to other applications. I do have to log into this environment in here very quickly and then release a task. So an example is that if you are an end user, you would pretty much go and make some changes to this task and etc. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead. I'm just going to release this task. And then the next options in here is really what do we want to do. So you'll have an option where you can create a task, you can couple, decouple. However, what you'll notice is that, for example, if I set this to be tested, and then I'll save this change, what you'll see is that now on to be tested, I'll have different options, such as I can create and import a TOC. So very similar to other applications, change management applications. Once I have the access to status to be tested, I am able to also be able to create and import a TOC in my QA environment. Now, you always have to come back and obviously check this option in here to see what happens. But what you can see is we also will automatically, depending on how many TOCs you create within this environment or for this transport, it will automatically capture that TOC number, and it will give you an idea exactly from what transport that TOC was created. So this is a TOC that was just created, also was released. And the next step is that, for example, once we refresh this, it should also tell us if that TOC is imported as well. For the sake of demo, what we're going to do is we're going to have then set this to successfully tested. And then in this case, once you set it to successfully tested, it will automatically give us the option to release and import the TR. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and release this transport. And then we'll just reload the form. ServiceNow, so at any given time you make any changes, I'll have to refresh the form. So now you see that the transport is released, for example. The next option is that I'm going to go ahead and import it by selecting this button in here. And then once you select it, and then I'll go back, and I'm not sure exactly how long it's going to take, but once you select import, for example, then you should see the option in here that transport was imported as well. So we'll go ahead and click import, which I think I might have already done that. And then the next status in here is that once you're done with the task, we'll go ahead and complete this task and then click on save. And then we'll go back to the initial change request in here, which is this one. So I'll go ahead and open the initial change request. And as you see here, for example, at the bottom, you'll see that, for example, you have a task in here now that's closed. Now, in addition to that, you could have one task where you could perform all the changes and all the way and import them into a productive environment. However, the scenario that I have in here is once I, for example, approve this change and I set it to implement, then I'll get a second task where I'm able to import this change into a productive environment. So what I'll do is I'll go ahead and request approval for this change. And then let me go ahead and approve it very quickly. Then I have a second approval. Now what we'll do is we'll go ahead and set this to implement stage. And then what you'll notice is that it will automatically create some additional tasks in here. So a couple of these, such as post-implementation and implementation, are part of the standard ServiceNow. But however, we have this additional task, which is approve and import transports into, let's say, your productive environment. So now the idea is that, for example, for that same transport, now it's a different task. So what I'll do is, for example, in this case, this is where you could have different types of approvals depending on your assignment group. And then you could approve this change, for example, for production. And then once you, for example, it's set to import it into production and you save it, then what I'll do is I'll have some additional options in here to import. So let's say approved for production. And I'll go ahead and save it. And then I'm going to go ahead and select this option in here. And then you can select on import. And this will automatically, for example, import it into the next environment, which in this case, if your environment is a productive environment, for example, or if it's, let's say, pre-production, you can set different statuses to import into your pre-production first and then into your productive environment as well. So after this change is imported into your production environment, At that point, what we'll do is we'll go ahead and close this task as well and save it. And then go back to my change request. And then at this point, from a change management perspective, so you'll have these two different tasks in here at the bottom, where, for example, we created and imported changes into a QA environment, and then we also approved and imported the transports into a productive environment. But as you can see, the important part in here is that from this perspective, your change process within ServiceNow has not changed, besides the fact that we've added an SAP change into the form, and then also that you have this additional change tasks for your transports. For example, I'll give you an idea exactly what happened to that transport. At this point, this is where, for example, you can review and also close this change as you do today within your ServiceNow application. Now, in the next demonstration here is I'm gonna show you a very similar demonstration in the Jira software. So especially if you have some attendees here that use Jira and not ServiceNow. So within Jira, a very similar process applies. For example, the only thing is we don't have change tasks, therefore the TMS integration is integrated slightly different. But one of the first important parts in here within Jira, once you deploy our application, what we provide is automatically a mapping page, for example, for any of your landscapes. So this is just some technical information, but however, for this, for example, the demonstration that I will show you today is that for this specific ECD environment in here, you'll see that, for example, as I go through these different statuses within my Jira tickets, then you'll have different actions that you can perform for the transport management. So an example is if you want something like create TR, release TR, import into the test environment, if you want these different types of options for you to show, for example, you can select, which type of issue type you wanna integrate with for your TMS. And then, for example, in my backlog, let's say I want to create a TR. And when I'm selected for development, at this point, I want to create an import transport of copies. So you can pretty much add your own workflow, or if you have already a workflow within Jira that you manage your SAP changes, and you can have it either controlled or you can have it completely optional in here as well. So if you don't add this mapping pages, pretty much you will see all of the TMS options directly within the Jira application. Now, the next step is in here that we'll go ahead and go back into this sample project in here, and then what we'll do is we'll go ahead and create a new change. Now, in this case, we'll go ahead and provide a name for it. And we'll just call this one demo for webinar. So for the sake of time, I'll leave everything empty in the form. The only piece in here that's important for the integration between Jira and TMS, that you'll have some type of checkbox or toggle where you have to tell this Jira ticket that this is part of the TMS integration. So in our case, we have a SAP transportable change, but this can be any type of field that you can utilize as long as it can trigger that integration. And then once you click on create, so in that box, why it's very important is that you could utilize the same project for SAP and non-SAP, or for example, you could utilize a project that maybe doesn't have a transport change at all, therefore you just leave it empty. It's not a non-transportable change, therefore you follow your standard process. If you do select yes, for example, you get this transport option in here. And as you see, as of right now, because I have a restrictive workflow, I don't necessarily have any options in here to do anything within the TMS tab. However, for example, once I select then the ticket and put this into, let's say, into development, for example, and then we'll just give it a second in here. Now you'll see that you'll have different options for the SAP transport. So in this case, now I can either create or I can couple a transport if I have one already in the environment. Similar to what I showed you for the ServiceNow side, once you select create TR, you'll have some options in here. So what we'll do is demo for webinar. And then within this demo system, I'll select, so in this case in here, if you have multiple environments, multiple development environments that you want to create TRs for, you'll have a list of all of your dev systems that you have integrated. And then we'll do a customize and transport as well. So in this case, in here, what I'll do is I'll go ahead and search for a user, and then I'll assign myself. You can also enter your username in here and search for it. So this is the owner, this is the task, and then I'm going to leave these options open, for example. But if you want to do some manual steps before the import, you could also add those manual steps for the transport that you need to perform. I'm going to uncheck this, and then the last step is we're going to click on create. Now, we'll give this just a second. It's very quick. It will automatically create the transport. In addition to that, it will automatically create also the transport task. So if I am to go back within this area in here, for example, now you'll see that that latest transport demo for webinar was created. So now let's just take an example now that I've done some customizations and etc. So what I'll do is I'll just release that task for the transport. And as you can see in here, I don't have an option for me to create a transport of copy. So what I'll do next is I'll set this to in progress, and then we'll just give it a second, or you can click on refresh in here within this application. And then once you do that, for example, now you'll see that now you have the option to create and import a TOC. So what I'll do is I'll select the transport, and it's very important that if you also have multiple transports in here, what you can do is you can select only one transport if you want to create a TOC for that, or multiple. So we'll go ahead and create a transport of copies. And again, given the fact that this is actually doing the work in the background, so it will take just a minute. And as soon as that transport of copies is created, it will show it towards the bottom of the list in here. And now you'll have some different options in here, what you can do within the transport. As you see, being a restrictive workflow, I'm not able to release the transport yet. However, once I, for example, go into testing, and then we'll go ahead and refresh this workflow again. And then now you see that you have the option for you to be able to release that transport. So we'll just give it a second in here. And then what I'll do is I'll go ahead and release the transport. So at this point, you see that it's modifiable, but as soon as the transport is released in the background, I'm able to release the transport directly in here. Now, the next option is in here. Once the transport is released, what we want to do is I'm going to go ahead and let's say set this to, before we do that, so I slightly jump. What I'll do is I'll go ahead and import this transport into my next environment. So we'll go ahead and set it to successfully tested. And then what I'll do is, in my status successfully tested, I'm able to go ahead and import that specific transport. And in addition to that, we also bring all of the additional options, for example. So let's say that you want to leave a transport in a queue, or you want to import the transport again, for example, or especially it's important sometimes if you want to overwrite original. So all of the options that you get within this TMS directly, if you want to import it in there, they're automatically displayed in here, so you don't necessarily have to navigate to that application. So once you click on import, at that point, this should import the transport into my next environment. So you see, for example, from my dev is exported, and then now it should be imported in the next environment. But it looks like I may have a downgrade protection issue, so that's probably not going to get imported, and I'll have to import it again. But for the sake of the demo, for example, the idea is that you're able to control these different types of statuses for your transport. You're able to couple, decouple, also, for example, ignore and import. So because we got an error, let's say in this ECQ environment, at that point, the idea is that I am going to go ahead and ignore, and I'm going to go ahead and import this transport. I'm going to go ahead and import this transport and ignoring any type of downgrade protection. So therefore, what I'm doing is I'm overriding those changes, for example, that I got in there. So all of these different options, for example, are completely visible depending on the workflow restrictions that you set on that mapping page. Now, but last but not least, the last one is going to be around Azure DevOps, for example. A very similar process is for Azure DevOps. I'm not necessarily going to go through all the different options, but within the Azure DevOps, you'll have a transport tab. And if you just give it a second, it should populate in here. But you'll have a transport tab with all of those different options as well, where you can create a transport TOC, import it all the way into your productive environment, depending on what you have. And in addition to that, for example, if you select the transport, you'll have all of these other options as well, such as the task numbers, also if there are any TOCs. In addition to that, also for Azure DevOps, you will get a specific mapping page. So we'll select a mapping project in here. And then also in here, this is where you're able to also decide within your workflow. So you have different statuses, for example, on your Azure DevOps epics or tasks or features and etc. So if it's an epic, you decide, different statuses that you have, and then what type of options would you like for this to do. So an example is if the status is to do, you can select create TR, maybe create and import TOC. You can have both of those options by adding different statuses in here, for example. So once you add this restricted workload, you save it, and then pretty much that's how the transport options will show within the issue types. And again, keep in mind, you can map as many landscapes as you'd like. You can also map different types of issues. So even if you have any type of custom issues within the ADO Jira, for example, you can map those directly within this mapping page in here. There's also some mass import and logs similar to Jira. So if you need to import mass transports, you have the option in here. You also have logs at any given time. If there's any type of issues within the application, you'll have some logs that will at least guide you what the issues are. Okay, so that is the demonstration for all of the 3 different applications. Hopefully this was helpful for you to have at least a understanding. It's quite technical, so therefore feel free to ask any questions that you may have either in the chat here.
Okay, sounds good. Yes, please do put your questions in the chat. I do have a few that we can work through here. First question was around installation. How does that work? What does it take to get installed, and how do you set up what's required from the customer perspective on the installation front?
So installation perspective, we have a couple of different options. Again, we don't require any type of third party or any type of middleware. Obviously, the ServiceNow, Azure, or Jira, they do have to communicate with the backend, which in this case would be SAP. We've been able to I guess we have had other customers that we are successful to do that through firewalls and etc. You have a couple of different options. You can either deploy this in one of your SAP environments, for example, where that SAP environment can communicate with all of your other applications within your SAP ecosystem. And therefore, once we connect to that SAP environment, let's say like a dev system, therefore from there, it will be RFC based, that we can communicate very similar to what TMS does today, where you'll have a domain system and then it communicates to the rest. So our goal is really just to establish a connection to the domain system.
Okay, perfect. That makes sense. We had a question around what's the impact to the current process if you have people already using, let's say it's ServiceNow, and you want to kind of isolate so that their processes are not impacted by any of this. How do we make that happen?
Fairly easy. During the demonstration, and I believe even the presentation, from a ServiceNow perspective, we were only adding a single tab on there for, like, let's say an SAP change. So if you are able to bring this into your current workflow, let's say, which you should be able to, then it's a matter of just adding some additional tabs within your form. But also it's very flexible. So for example, if you want to have a completely different change process for SAP, we're giving you all of the options for you to be able to make it restrictive or optional, where you're able to create and import transports on different statuses.
Okay. Okay, that makes sense. Yep, I remember seeing that in the demo. Then we had a question regarding external transports. How can I handle external transports, like from files?
External transports, like non-SAP transports?
I guess it could be non-SAP or from an external SAP system that have been exported. I'm not sure if the person asked that question wants to provide a clarifying, but let's just say it's an external transport from another SAP system. I think we had that case in one of our other case studies.
As long as it's a SAP transport, we should be able to, even if it's not created directly from one of the applications, we should be able to couple that transport with within the ticket, let's call it. So the coupling option will couple any type of transport that you have within the TMS or the environment. So that shouldn't be an issue as long as it's within the landscape that you're trying to promote it through.
Okay. Then I had a comment from one of the participants that said, well, we have a very complex environment here. We have multiple applications. We use ServiceNow and Jira and, maybe and Cloud ALM and, Azure DevOps, all of the above. And so we've seen a lot of those different types of complexities. We also have people that have very stringent requirements in terms of, whether it's regulated industries where you have to have compliance controls and those types of things. So complex processes are the name of the game for us. We have people using on-premise solutions for Jira instead of the cloud version. And some of the external transports and automations and things like that, we've helped to solve some pretty unique problems there as well. What about segregation? If you have anything else to talk about in terms of the complex projects, I think the biggest point to get across is really the solution is highly configurable. So we don't have to write code to support most workflows. The base platform is pretty flexible. Any other comments on that, Valdrin?
No, but I can add some remarks to that. I mean, I think we mentioned multiple times, and you just did. Yeah, I mean, I think what we see from most of our customers is having the flexibility and also the ease of use from integrating this application. For example, there is really no code or any really not even much technical besides the communication between this tool and, let's say, your backend, which is really not necessarily your tool, is just your application in general. And then the rest of it, as I was showing you in the mapping pages, the rest of the workflows and process can pretty much be managed directly in there. And also, in the future, if you decide to, let's say, add a different status in Jira or ServiceNow, etc., it's a matter of just adding that additional status on the mapping page.
Okay, great. What about segregation of duties? How can we help people that are trying to make sure that somebody doesn't import their own transports, those types of things?
So I think that's what's important about those restrictive workflows, for example. So let's take an example. If a user in ServiceNow is not able to make any changes when the status is in assessed, for example, the same segregation of duties would apply for this as well. So, for example, they won't be able to make any changes to the imports and etc. fall into the segregation of duties that you already have today based on your groups and your authorizations.
Okay, makes sense. I think you covered all the questions that we got from our audience. I want to thank our audience very much for joining us today. Hopefully this was a bit of an overview. Maybe it left you with additional questions about how this would work specifically within your environment. The best for that is always just to reach out directly. There's a couple ways you can get in touch with us. You can go to our website, which is corealm.com. That's corealm.com. and there's a Talk to an Expert button right in the top right corner of the page. Just click that, and that'll take you to a form where you can just enter your information, and we'll reach back out to you and schedule time to go through a one-on-one session or with your team so that we can talk through any customizations, or not just customizations, but tailoring the solution to your specific environment. So happy to have those types of conversations. Please note that we, as I mentioned at the start of the webinar, that we will be next week in Philadelphia in Newtown Square, SAP Newtown Square, for the SAP ALM Summit. So if you're going to be there, please reach out to us. We'd be happy to meet up with you at the show. And we have a talk going on where we can go into more depth on some of these topics. We also have webinars in our website for additional upcoming sessions. That includes a session coming up on April the 2nd, I think it is, where we're going to talk about Live Compare from Tricentis and how we can use test optimization to improve the quality of your SAP releases and minimize the amount of testing you need to do to cover all of your risk areas. We also do with Tricentis, we do test automation, as we can cover those types of topics as well. Valdrin, thanks very much for walking us through all of this, and thank you all for joining us today. It was great to be able to interact with you, and hopefully we will be in touch soon. But in any case, enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks, everyone.